What's going on, everybody? Nathan Barna here. Today I wanted to address a question I get frequently, and that is, what program should I follow? Come on, Barna, what's the right program for me? And the first implication is that the program is why you're not where you want to be, when, usually it's the implementation of that program that is where the real results are going to come from. But besides that, I wanted to give you guys some tips on, how to choose what program to use, and, some things that you should consider if you're going to design your own program, whether your goal is to be an elite weightlifter, an elite level athlete, or if you're just a stay-at-home mom wanting to look better and feel good and have the energy to take care of your kids. So that's the first point here, is you have to figure out what your goals are, because depending upon what your goals are, that's going to determine what types of exercises you should be doing, what intensity you should be doing them at, and how much volume you should be doing with those exercises. So again, whether you're an elite level weightlifter, your program, is going to look a lot different than if you're a businessman or a businesswoman that just wants to have a general level of fitness to look good and to feel good. But a lot of times what I see happen is that, you decide that you need to do some exercise of some sort, but you don't really have a good grasp on what your goals are, or what you're trying to get out of that exercise program. But so you just start, doing something you found on the internet, or you just start running a lot or walking a lot, or you just go to the gym and, do a circuit on all the machines that you're comfortable with. And, it's very common that most of us, we don't have any kind of structure behind what we're doing. And I'd say that's one of the first steps, is once you establish what your goals are, is to create a structure for yourself. And within that structure, there's 5 main things that you should consider when it comes to designing an exercise program. These are things that I consider when I'm designing a program for somebody else, and these are things that you should consider if you're trying to design your own program. So you have to look at, one, how much money do you have, or how much money are you willing to invest in this? So, that might mean that you need to invest in a gym membership. And obviously, depending on what gym you go to, the fees associated with that might differ, but also what you get out of it might differ. And then you have to, if you're going to create your own home gym and you're going to buy equipment, then you have to figure out how much that's going to cost and what you need, which ties into the next one, which is resources. So again, dependent upon what your goals are, and depending upon where you're at, you have to decide what resources you need, or what equipment you need, or that you have access to. And then you have to decide how much time you have. So, if you can only go to a gym, or you can only follow an exercise regimen 3 days a week for an hour per session, and that's something that you have to factor in, and you have to create a structure around your day to include that. So part of that is knowing what time of day is going to be optimal for you, whether it's morning or evening or even afternoon, like what's going to allow you to have the most productive workout or training session. And then also, how much time is that training session going to take, and how much time do you have? A rule of thumb is it's typically going to take you twice as long as you think it's going to take, especially if you factor in having to travel back and forth from a gym. So if you only have an hour, you have to factor in that you might have to travel and that it's going to take you longer than what you expect. So if you only have an hour, you might want to only have a program that's going to take a half hour. So you know that you're not going to be rushed and pressed for time or not able to complete the program. And then the fourth thing to consider is energy. And the energy directly ties into, not only how much actual energy do you have as far as your, if you got a good night's sleep or if you're loaded up on caffeine that day or whatever that might be, but also your overall stress load. Your stress load is going to affect the amount of energy and the amount of physiological resources that you're going to have for a training program. I mean, for instance, if you've got a heavy workload and you're a parent and you have kids that you're trying to take care of, and you're having stress in your relationships, and you're also feel burdened financially, those are all stresses that are already present even before you enter the gym setting. So when you add a training program on top of that, you're just adding stress on top of stress. So again, you have to decide what your stress load is like before you choose what kind of program you're going to be, because if you're already under a lot of stress, you're going to want a program that is going to either be minimal or that is actually going to be more of a work in, where you're using movement to cultivate more energy in your body than you're expending to do the exercise. And there's something I'll probably get more into this on a later date. But that's one thing to consider, and that's going to affect your overall energy level. If you're constantly drained, you don't necessarily want to train, because if your training is just draining, then you're not really getting anything out of it. And then the last thing is willingness. And this one, you could have all the money, all the resources, all the time, and all the energy in the world, but if you don't have the willingness to be consistent and stick to a program and see it through even when it's challenging, then all the other things don't really matter. And this directly ties into what your goals are and what your dream is. If your dream or your goal isn't big enough, then you're not going to have the willingness that is necessary to be dedicated to a training program to fully realize the results of that training program. So those are the main 5 things to consider when you're trying to create a program for yourself, or if you're, if you're a coach and you're trying to design a program for somebody else. So if you're, looking around and you're deciding whether or not you should do like CrossFit or cardio exercise or high intensity training, again, these are going to be dependent upon your goals. But what you don't want to do is have your training program in direct contradiction to what your goals are. If you're trying to be an elite level weightlifter, doing yoga 3 times a week and running like a cross country runner is training completely different systems than what you need to do to be an elite level weightlifter. And this is very common in sports like football and baseball and really a lot of the majority of sports, where most of us think that we need to have this high aerobic capacity and we need to be able to run for miles and miles and miles. But most sports are anaerobic in the sense that the sport is in short bursts followed by rest. Like in football, for example, you might have a play that lasts 6, maybe 10 seconds, but then it's followed by a rest. So there's a quick, short, explosive burst of activity, but then it rests. So again, if you're running miles and miles and miles trying to get better at football, you're training a completely different system. So this is another thing to get clear on when you're designing a program or when you're trying to find what program is right for you. If you're just a lay person and you just want to look good and feel good, my advice for you as a coach would be to do potentially some sort of high intensity interval training or a CrossFit style training. But the caveat to that is that you want to take the time to develop proper movement patterns and develop the prerequisite flexibility and muscle balance and stability, static and dynamic stability, so that you can handle functional movements that are usually in high intensity interval training and especially in CrossFit type training. Those can be very good modalities to get you, fit and looking good, but a lot of times people are thrown into that environment and into those types of movements without the prerequisite training. And that's where having a coach that, knows and is aware of the stages of development and what to look for and how to progress, whether like an athlete, and in my definition, everybody's an athlete because we all have to do basic movements, and how to progress an athlete. That's something that's, important to find if you're unsure of these things and you don't have a good background in basic human movement and kinesiology and physiology. And that's kind of my goal with these videos, is to bring awareness to all of these things. So again, that's another thing to consider, and that usually that will be better for the lay average person, the general population person that doesn't have goals of being a super elite level athlete, because it's, with aerobic training where you're in a constant state of stress essentially, and you're going to be in a very catabolic state or stressful state because you're doing, even though it's a low intensity, you're doing a lot of reps under a small amount of time. Whereas, in a weight training environment, the intensity might be higher, but you're only working for, a few seconds, maybe 12 to 30 seconds at a time, followed by a rest. So you might be running for an hour, and that whole hour is you're in a catabolic state that whole hour, versus an hour resistance training session. You might only actually be under a stress load for 8 to 12 minutes, which has a completely different hormonal response on your body and has a completely different effect on your metabolism and your body's ability to utilize energy and utilize fat. And typically, unless you're an endurance athlete, you're typically going to fare better doing more resistance type, again, high intensity training type exercise where there's intense movement followed by a period of rest. So basically, those are the things that I wanted to bring to the table, and some tips I wanted to give you guys. The only other thing, and it's something that's more advanced, is if you are an elite level lifter or you aspire to be one, then you have to consider the different ways to progress your training and be honest with your experience level and your capabilities. Because even if you've been doing, playing a sport for many years, but you're not familiar with a structured training program, in the gym, your training days is set back to zero. It's a completely different environment, completely different mentality, and completely different movements in the weight room than it is on the field or on the court. So you don't want to assume that just because you've been an athlete for a number of years that you can handle an advanced training program. So you have to be realistic with yourself here and progress yourself accordingly, or again, hire a coach that can progress you accordingly. Start at a beginner level stage where you may be doing a general base of movements, and then over time you can progress into more advanced training modalities and programming design. Feel free, if you guys have any other specific questions about this, feel free to reach out to me. I hope this helps, and I hope you guys find this stuff valuable. Constantly working to, get more of this information out here and practicing my ability to articulate this ideas and say the things that I want to say, because as you can imagine, just like designing a program, making these videos and articulating ideas in front of a camera is a skill in itself that I'm working to get better at, and I'm hoping to continue to improve my skill in this so that I can provide you guys with more and more value in the future. So I hope you enjoy the rest of your day, and I'll talk to you guys next time.